Imagine this, you're in a heated but harmless online debate. You post your opinion, close the app, and move on with your day. A few hours later, a notification pops up. It's a reply to your comment, and it's a picture of your own front door. Today, we are sharing 3 true terrifying stories of the ultimate digital violation. The moment the thin wall between your online life and your real life is not just breached, but completely and utterly destroyed. The true horror of doxing isn't the initial moment of exposure, it's the silence that follows. It's the profound, suffocating paranoia that infects every aspect of your life. Every ring of the doorbell, every car that slows down on your street, every anonymous phone call becomes a potential threat. The mob doesn't have to show up at your door. Their threat has already invaded your home, turning your sanctuary into a prison of your own fear. You are no longer safe, and you will never feel truly safe again. But this isn't a random act of chaos, it's a tactic, a weapon. By exploring these real, chilling accounts, from a simple online debate that turned into a real-world threat, to a leaked HR spreadsheet that put an entire family at risk, we will expose the devastating reality of what happens when your privacy is destroyed. These stories are a disturbing look at the modern-day ghost that haunts us all. The quiet, terrifying knowledge that a stranger, a world away, knows exactly where you live. Now, before we check our privacy settings, make sure you are subscribed to Whispered Fear and have activated the bell. Because in the modern world, the only thing more dangerous than being seen is being found. Our first story is about the terrifying speed at which a simple, intellectual disagreement can devolve into a real-world, life-threatening nightmare. It's about the thin, fragile wall that separates our online lives from our physical ones, and the horrifying moment when a faceless, nameless mob decides to tear that wall down. It comes from a man named Liam, a history teacher who learned that the most dangerous weapon in a debate is not a fact, but an address, and that the sound of his own doorbell would become the soundtrack to his new and permanent life of fear. At 34, Liam's life was a quiet, orderly affair. He was a high school history teacher at Madison West High School in Wisconsin, a man who found a deep and abiding passion in the complex, nuanced stories of the past. His life was a comfortable, predictable routine. He would spend his days in the loud, chaotic but ultimately hopeful world of his classroom, trying to ignite a spark of curiosity in his students. And he would spend his evenings in the quiet, peaceful sanctuary of his small second-floor apartment in the Williamson-Marquette neighborhood, a place of old, beautiful houses and a quiet, academic calm. He lived with his fiancée, Sarah, a landscape architect, and their lazy, overweight golden retriever, Gus. He was a man who believed in the power of rational discourse, a man who thought that even the most contentious disagreements could be resolved through a calm and respectful exchange of ideas. His hobby, his one true intellectual indulgence, was engaging in historical debates on online forums. He was an active member of the HRR history subreddit, a massive online community of fellow history buffs. He loved the intellectual sparring, the chance to test his own knowledge against that of others. It was a safe, anonymous space where the strength of your argument was the only thing that mattered, or so he thought. The debate that would destroy his sense of safety began, as most do, with a single, simple, and deeply held opinion. It was a Tuesday night. Liam was on his couch, his laptop warm on his legs, the gentle sound of Sarah sketching in her notebook beside him a comforting, domestic backdrop. He was scrolling through a popular thread on the subreddit, a heated debate about the true motivations behind the American Civil War. He saw a comment, a common but historically inaccurate argument, that had hundreds of upvotes. He did what he always did. He replied. He wrote a long, detailed, and meticulously researched counter-argument. He cited his sources. He was polite, respectful, and utterly verifiably correct. He was not aggressive. He was not condescending. He was a teacher. Teaching, he posted the comment, a small, satisfying feeling of intellectual clarity washing over him, and then he closed his laptop and went to bed. He had no idea that he had just, with a few well-reasoned paragraphs, declared war on a silent and utterly irrational enemy. He woke up the next morning to a storm. His Reddit inbox was a sea of angry red notifications. His comment, which had been a polite academic argument, had been downvoted into oblivion, and the replies were not counter-arguments. They were a torrent of pure, unadulterated and deeply personal rage. He was called an idiot, a liar, a traitor. His intelligence was questioned. His motives were maligned. His profile, which was mostly anonymous but contained a few vague details about his profession, was dissected. Of course, a teacher would say that, probably a tenured professor, safe in his ivory tower. The mob was not interested in a debate. They were interested in a target. He tried for a few hours to engage. He replied with facts, with sources, with a desperate and increasingly frantic appeal to reason, but it was like trying to reason with a hurricane. His every word was twisted, his every point intentionally misinterpreted, and then it happened. The moment the digital war became a real-world one, buried in a long chain of angry, anonymous comments, was a single, simple, and utterly terrifying sentence. It was from a user with a deleted account. It read, "This guy thinks he's so smart. Let's see how smart he feels when he can't sleep at night. I'm sure the folks at 1515 Williamson Street, apartment 4 in Madison would love to hear his well-researched opinions in person." He stared at the comment, his blood turning to ice. It was his address, his real, physical, and supposedly private address, a piece of information he had never, not once, posted online. The act of doxing was a declaration. The wall between his online life and his real life had just been shattered. The mob was no longer just a collection of angry, anonymous words on a screen. It was a real, tangible, and now geographically specific threat. It was at his door. He deleted his comment. He deleted his entire Reddit account, but he knew with a certainty that was a new and permanent kind of fear, that it was too late. The information was out there. A screenshot, a copy-paste. It was in the wild now, a permanent digital tattoo that he could never erase. The days that followed were a slow, quiet descent into a new and deeply unsettling reality. His home, his sanctuary, was now a source of profound and constant anxiety. Every creak of the old floorboards, every car that slowed down on the street outside, every footstep in the hallway, it was all a potential threat. He and Sarah became prisoners in their own home. They kept the blinds drawn. They stopped ordering food delivery. They would flinch at every unexpected sound. The quiet, peaceful rhythm of their life had been replaced by a tense, vigilant silence, the silence of a prey animal that knows a predator is nearby. The first real-world manifestation of the digital threat came on a Friday night. A week after the doxing, they were watching a movie, the volume turned low. When the doorbell rang, it was a loud, insistent, and utterly terrifying sound in their quiet, terrified world. They both froze, their eyes meeting in a shared, silent moment of pure panic. They weren't expecting anyone. Liam crept to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. He waited, his heart pounding, for a full minute. Nothing. He was about to dismiss it as a prank, a kid from the neighborhood, when the bell rang again, a long, continuous, and angry buzz. He looked through the peephole again, still empty, but this time he saw it, a thin, almost invisible piece of fishing line tied to the small plastic doorbell button leading down and out of sight under the door. Someone was outside, not on his porch, but in the main hallway of the building, hiding, just out of sight of the peephole, ringing his doorbell with a string. A quiet, patient, and utterly sadistic act of psychological torture. They were not there to hurt him. They were there to watch him react, to watch him be afraid. He stumbled back from the door, a wave of nausea washing over him. He didn't tell Sarah about the string. He just told her it was a prank. He called the police. An officer from the Madison Police Department came. He was sympathetic, but there was nothing he could do. The officer had said, his voice a weary sigh, "It's a common and deeply unfortunate part of the world we live in now, sir. We'll increase patrols in the area. But my advice? Be vigilant and maybe stay offline for a while." The advice was well-meaning, but useless. The damage was already done. He had stayed offline, but the internet had followed him home. The quiet, anonymous war of attrition continued. A few nights later, a dozen pizzas were delivered to his apartment, all cash on delivery. A week after that, his name and Sarah's name were signed up for dozens of mailing lists. For religious cults, for political extremist groups, for every strange and disturbing corner of the internet. Their mailbox, once a source of mundane bills and junk mail, was now a daily delivery of quiet paper-based harassment. He was a man who was being slowly, methodically, and invisibly dismantled. His sense of safety was gone. His peace of mind was gone. And the final and most devastating blow was the effect it was having on his relationship with Sarah. The shared fear, which had at first brought them closer, was now a corrosive presence. The fortress of their home had become a pressure cooker of anxiety and suspicion. The final, horrifying resolution came not in the form of a physical confrontation, but in a quiet and deeply chilling discovery. After a month of this silent psychological siege, Liam had had enough. He was a historian, a researcher. He would not be a passive victim. He would find out who was doing this. He started with the one single piece of data he had, the original, anonymous Reddit account that had first posted his address. The account had been deleted, but the username was still visible in old, cached versions of the thread. He began a deep, obsessive, and probably legally questionable dive into the digital breadcrumbs of this single username. He spent weeks, every single night after Sarah had gone to bed, in a frantic, paranoid search, cross-referencing the name with other forums, with other social media platforms, and he found him. The username was connected to a Flickr account, an old, mostly abandoned photo-sharing account. There were only a few pictures, mostly of landscapes of old historic buildings, and one picture of a person, a group photo, from a local amateur Civil War reenactment event that had taken place a few years ago, in a park just outside of Madison. And in the photo, standing in the back row in the ill-fitting wool uniform of a Confederate soldier, was a face he recognized. It was a man from his own real life, a quiet, unassuming, and seemingly friendly man named David, a fellow history teacher, from a rival high school, James Madison Memorial, a man he would see at academic conferences, a man he had had a few polite and completely forgettable professional disagreements with in the past. But the most chilling detail was not the man's face. It was the background of the photo. It was taken in front of an old, historic two-story colonial house, a house with a familiar wraparound porch, a house that David was, in the photo, standing in front of with a proud, proprietary smile. It was the house that Liam's own parents had just sold 6 months ago, the house he had grown up in. The final, horrifying, and deeply personal truth of his haunting crashed down on him. The man who was terrorizing him was not a random, anonymous troll from the internet. He was a man who knew him, a man who had been a quiet, peripheral figure in his professional life for years, and a man who, he now realized, had likely put in a competing and losing bid on his own childhood home. The entire months-long campaign of psychological terror, the doxing, the doorbell, the pizzas, the mailing lists. It had not been about a historical debate. It had not been about a differing opinion. It had been about a house, a petty, pathetic, and deeply unhinged act of revenge from a man who had lost a real estate transaction. He was left with a knowledge that was a form of a living death. The monster in his story was not a faceless digital mob. It was a man he knew, a man he saw at the grocery store, a man whose quiet, simmering, and utterly irrational rage had been hiding in plain sight all along. He took the evidence to the police. A restraining order was issued, but the damage was done. The fortress of his life, his belief in a rational, ordered world, had been permanently breached. He and Sarah moved to a new apartment, a sterile, anonymous high-rise with a 24-hour security guard, but the fear is a ghost that has followed them. He is haunted by the quiet, chilling knowledge that in the modern world, the most dangerous threats are not the ones that come from 1,000 miles away. They are the ones that are living just down the street. And he is left with a final and deeply unsettling question: how many other quiet, polite, and seemingly normal people in our lives are just one single perceived slight away from becoming a monster?
We saw what you paused on.
Our second story is about the quiet, smiling, and deeply modern horror of the neighborhood watch. It's not about a monster that breaks down your door, but a community that invites itself in, using the friendly, helpful, and utterly inescapable tools of social media. It comes from a woman named Anna, who learned that a simple, proof of delivery photograph can be turned into a public indictment, and that the most dangerous form of doxing isn't a malicious act from a stranger, but a friendly reminder from a neighbor who is always watching. At 29, Anna's life was a carefully constructed escape. She had just moved to Irvine, California, a city that felt like a blueprint for safety itself. After a chaotic and deeply unhealthy relationship in Los Angeles, she had craved the opposite: order, predictability, and a profound, beautiful, and utterly boring sense of peace. She found it in a sprawling, master-planned apartment community called The Park at Irvine Spectrum Center. It was a world of manicured lawns, of identical beige stucco buildings, of a quiet, almost sterile perfection. For Anna, a freelance web designer who worked from home, it was a sanctuary. Her small, one-bedroom apartment was her entire world, a fortress against the chaos she had left behind. Her greatest vulnerability was her past. Her greatest desire was to be left alone. The building had a private, residents-only Facebook group, which the leasing office had strongly encouraged her to join. The cheerful leasing agent had said, "It's a great way to meet your neighbors and stay informed about community events." At first, it seemed to be exactly that. The group's page was a feed of mundane, suburban life, posts about lost cats, recommendations for local plumbers, cheerful announcements about the upcoming community pool party. But underneath the cheerful veneer, she noticed a quiet and deeply unsettling undercurrent of passive-aggressive judgment, posts about improperly sorted recycling, photos of cars parked slightly over the line, a quiet, constant, and smiling surveillance that the community seemed to have accepted as normal. The event that would turn that quiet surveillance into a direct, personal, and terrifying attack was a simple, everyday act. She ordered a package. It was a new, expensive, ergonomic office chair from Herman Miller, a necessary investment for her work-from-home career. It arrived via Amazon on a Tuesday afternoon while she was on a client call. A few minutes after it was delivered, she received the standard notification, "Your package has been delivered," and with it, the proof of delivery photo. The photo showed the large, brown box sitting neatly in front of her apartment door, number 30B, but the driver, in his haste, had taken the photo from a slight angle. And in the photo, the shipping label with her full name, Anna Gable, and her full address, including the apartment number, was perfectly and clearly visible. She made a mental note to bring the box in as soon as her call was over, but she had no idea that her private, mundane delivery had already been screenshotted, uploaded, and was about to become the main event in the quiet digital arena of her new community. An hour later, her phone buzzed with a notification from the Facebook group, a new post, from a woman named Karen, the group's self-appointed and relentlessly cheerful moderator. The post was a photo. It was the Amazon driver's photo of the box in front of her door. The caption read, "Looks like someone's having a shopping spree. Just a friendly reminder to our new neighbors to please be mindful of building regulations. Rule 7B, which state that packages should not be left in the hallways for more than 1 hour, as they can be a hazard. Tagging you, Anna Gable, in 30B, so you see this. Welcome to the neighborhood." She stared at the post, her blood turning to ice. The cheerful emojis, the friendly reminder, the welcome to the neighborhood. It was all a thin, sugary coating on an act of pure and deeply public shaming. Her full name, her apartment number, and a photograph of her private delivery had just been broadcast to the hundreds of strangers who lived in her building. It was a small act of doxing, disguised as a helpful, community-minded post. And then, the comments began. "Wow, that's a big box. Someone's got a secret admirer. I hope she's not one of those people who just leaves their trash in the hallway. Honestly, the number of deliveries this building gets is out of control. It's starting to look like a warehouse." The comments were not overtly threatening. They were a swarm of 1,000. Tiny paper-cut-sized judgments, a quiet, smiling, and utterly devastating pile-on. Her private, professional purchase had been turned into a public spectacle, a piece of gossip for her bored, anonymous neighbors. She felt a profound sense of violation, of a deep and deeply personal humiliation. She reported the post to Karen, the moderator, sending her a private message, politely explaining that the post contained her private information and that she would appreciate it if it were taken down. Karen's reply was instant and dripping with a sweet, condescending poison. Oh, honey, don't be so sensitive. It's just neighbors looking out for each other. We're a community here. We all have to do our part. The post isn't about you. It's about the rules. She reported the post to Facebook, citing a violation of her privacy. 24 hours later, she received the familiar, soulless, automated response, "This post does not violate our community standards." She was trapped. The system, both social and digital, had sided with the mob. The online scrutiny began to bleed into her real, physical world. She started to feel the eyes of her neighbors on her. A polite smile in the elevator now felt loaded with a secret, judgmental knowledge. The quiet, anonymous peace of her sanctuary was gone, replaced by a constant, low-grade paranoia. She was no longer a resident. She was the package girl from apartment 30B. The final, terrifying escalation. The moment the quiet, smiling surveillance turned into something far more sinister came a week later. She was working in her apartment, her desk positioned, as it always was, in front of the large window that overlooked the central courtyard of the complex. She was on a video call with a client, deep in concentration. Later that evening, a new post appeared in the Facebook group. It was from Karen. It was another photo, a photo of the inside of her apartment, taken from a distance from one of the buildings across the courtyard. The photo showed her, a small blurry figure sitting at her desk, but it also showed the rest of her apartment, the stacks of moving boxes she had not yet had the time to unpack. The caption was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. Just a concerned neighbor here. The resident in 30B still has a very large amount of boxes and clutter in her apartment. A full 2 months after moving in, I'm sure it's nothing, but it's starting to look like a fire hazard. Management should really do something to ensure the safety of us all. The post was not just a complaint. It was a declaration. The mob was no longer content to watch her front door. They were now watching her windows. They were watching her life. The line between the public hallway and the private sanctuary of her own home had been completely and utterly erased. She was a prisoner in a glass cage, and the quiet, smiling, and deeply concerned zookeepers of her community were watching her every move. She called the management office, her voice a shaking, furious whisper. She told them about the post, about the photo taken through her window. The manager's response was a familiar and deeply unsatisfying sigh. "Ms. Gable, I understand your frustration, but we cannot control what residents post on their own. Private social media groups. As long as no one is physically threatening you, there's nothing we can do." She was left with a truth more horrifying than any ghost story. In the quiet, ordered, and supposedly safe world of her new home, it was perfectly acceptable for a group of strangers to publicly shame you, to share your private information, to take pictures of you through your own windows, and to label you as a threat. And the system, the one she paid thousands of dollars a month to for her own safety and security, was completely and utterly powerless to stop it. She now lives in a state of permanent vigilant twilight. Her blinds are always drawn. She has put up thick blackout curtains. She has placed a piece of tape over the camera on her laptop. Her apartment, once her sanctuary, is now a bunker. She has stopped ordering packages. She gets her groceries delivered to a locker at the local Amazon hub. She has created a life of quiet, paranoid, and deeply lonely security. She is left with the quiet, chilling knowledge that the most dangerous monsters are not the ones who wear masks and carry weapons. They are the ones who wear the mask of a concerned neighbor, the ones who carry a smartphone, the ones who are absolutely and completely convinced that their quiet, constant, and soul-crushing surveillance is not a crime. It's just being a good neighbor. And she is haunted by a final and deeply unsettling question. In a world where every window is a potential camera, and every neighbor is a potential judge, where exactly are you supposed to hide?
We have your family's number.
Our final story is about the quiet, bureaucratic horror of a data breach. Not the kind that results in a stolen credit card number, but the kind that results in a stolen life. It's about the terrifying moment when the secure, confidential world of your workplace is weaponized, and the harassment campaign spills over from your screen and begins to target the people you love most. It comes from a man named Michael, who learned that the most dangerous document in the world is not a state secret, but a simple shared and utterly devastating HR spreadsheet. At 42, Michael's life was a carefully constructed fortress of professional stability. He was a mid-level communications director for Astra Energy, a massive multinational energy corporation with a sprawling, campus-like headquarters in Houston's energy corridor. His job was a high-pressure balancing act of corporate messaging and damage control. He was a good man, in a difficult job in a ruthless industry. He was a company man, but he was a man with a conscience, a quiet, internal compass that he tried his best to follow. His life outside the office was his sanctuary, a quiet suburban home in the woodlands, a master-planned community that felt a world away from the cutthroat energy of the corporate world. His wife, Jessica, was a high school teacher. His elderly parents, retired and living a quiet life in Florida. His family was his anchor, the one true and uncompromised part of his world. His greatest fear was not of losing his job, but of the chaos of his professional life ever touching the quiet, ordered peace of his home. The decision that would lead to the complete and utter demolition of that peace was a necessary one, a brutal but unavoidable corporate restructuring. His department was being downsized, and it was his job, as the director, to choose which member of his team would be let go. The choice was a painful but logical one. A junior communications specialist named Tom, a young man who was talented, but whose performance had been consistently and demonstrably subpar. The layoff was handled by the book. HR was present. The severance package was generous. It was a clean, professional, and deeply unpleasant corporate execution. Tom had not taken it well, but he had taken the package. It was over, or so Michael thought. A week later, an email from HR landed in the inbox of every single person in his department. The subject line was, "Updated, departmental contact sheet for emergency preparedness drill." The email was from a friendly and slightly incompetent HR coordinator. It was a simple and seemingly harmless request for everyone to verify their information on the attached shared spreadsheet. But the spreadsheet was not just a list of work emails. It contained every employee's personal cell phone number, and, in the final and most devastating column, it contained the name and phone number of each employee's designated emergency contact. For Michael, that was his wife, Jessica, and his mother in Florida. The first call came that night just after 10 p.m., an unknown number. Michael answered. There was only silence on the other end, the faint hissing sound of an open digital line. And then, a quiet, almost imperceptible click as the caller hung up. He dismissed it. A simple wrong number. Then his phone buzzed again. A text message from a different unknown number. It was a single grainy and deeply unsettling image. A screenshot of his own face taken from his LinkedIn profile, with the word traitor written across it in a crude red digital scrawl. A cold, familiar dread began to pool in his stomach. This was not a coincidence. This was connected to the layoff. This was Tom. The harassment began as a low-grade, digital war of attrition. His phone would ring at all hours of the night, always from a different, untraceable VoIP number. Sometimes it was silence. Sometimes it was just the sound of someone breathing. He started getting signed up for dozens of spam email lists. His work calendar was flooded with phantom meeting, invites from anonymous sources. It was a campaign of juvenile, but deeply unsettling, digital pranks designed to unravel his sense of professional order. He reported it to HR. He reported it to the company's cybersecurity team. They were sympathetic, but their response was a lesson in corporate impotence. "We advise you to block the numbers. Mr. Thompson, we will monitor the situation." The message was clear. This was his problem, not theirs. The true terrifying and life-altering escalation, the moment the digital harassment became a real-world horror, came a week later. He was in a late-night meeting when his phone began to vibrate over and over, a frantic, desperate buzzing. It was his wife, Jessica. He excused himself from the meeting, a knot of pure, ice-cold fear in his chest. "What is it?" he said, answering the phone. Her voice was a choked, terrified sob. "Michael, they're calling me. They're calling my cell phone. Over and over, they know my name. They know your name. They're saying horrible things. About you. About what you did to Tom. How did they get my number?" The question hung in the air, a devastating and all too obvious answer already forming in his mind. The spreadsheet. The emergency preparedness spreadsheet that had been sent to the entire department. The one that contained not just his number, but hers. The wall he had so carefully constructed between his work life and his home life had just been breached. The monster was no longer just his to deal with. It was now at his wife's door. And then the second and most terrifying wave of the attack began. An hour later, he received a call from his father. In Florida, his voice was a mixture of confusion and a profound elderly fear. "Michael, what's going on?" "Your mother, she's a wreck. She's been getting phone calls all afternoon. A man screaming at her, cursing, saying you're a monster, that you destroy lives. He said he knows where we live. He said he's coming for us." "Michael, who are these people?" Honestly, the horror was now complete. The leaked HR sheet had not just been an act of professional revenge. It had been an act of familial terrorism. The disgruntled ex-employee had not just shared the spreadsheet with his own small circle. He had uploaded it to the dark, anonymous, and utterly remorseless corners of the internet. To a forum, a subreddit, a place where angry, disenfranchised, and deeply unstable people gathered. He had not just started a fire. He had thrown a can of gasoline onto the global digital bonfire of anonymous rage. The act of doxing was a declaration of total war. It was no longer just about him. It was about his entire family, his wife, his elderly and vulnerable parents. They were all targets now. Their names, their phone numbers, their sense of safety, all sacrificed on the altar of a single, petty and deeply pathetic act of workplace revenge. The weeks that followed were a living hell. They were a case study in the terrifying modern reality of a life that has been stripped of all privacy. The calls were relentless. Dozens a day to every member of their family. Sometimes they were silent. Sometimes they were screams. Sometimes they were detailed and deeply graphic threats of violence. They changed their phone numbers, but the new numbers would somehow inexplicably be leaked within a few days. The online mob was not just a mob. It was a sophisticated and deeply motivated network of digital ghosts, skilled in the art of finding information that was supposed to be private. The harassment began to escalate into the physical world. Their home address, which had been posted online, became a destination for a new kind of terror. Late-night pizza deliveries they didn't order, swarms of religious missionaries, and political canvassers and salesmen of every kind, all sent to their door by anonymous online forms. Every ring of their doorbell was a new, potential threat, a new act of psychological warfare. They were prisoners in their own quiet suburban home. The fortress he had built for his family had become a target. The final, devastating resolution came not from the police, who were sympathetic but ultimately powerless against a faceless, global, digital mob. It came from a lawyer. He and Jessica had to spend a significant portion of their life savings on legal fees, on digital forensics experts, on a private security consultant. They had to systematically and painstakingly erase their own lives from the internet, a slow, expensive, and deeply humiliating process of becoming digital ghosts. They had to install a new, high-end security system at his parents' home in Florida. They had to have difficult, terrifying conversations with their children's school. The man who had started it all, the ex-employee Tom, was eventually identified, but the legal consequences were a joke. A misdemeanor charge for online harassment, a small fine, a restraining order that was a piece of paper, a flimsy shield against a man who now knew every single detail of their lives. But the real monster he now knew was not Tom. Tom had been the spark. The real monster was the mob, the faceless, nameless, and utterly remorseless army of strangers who had, with a quiet, casual, and gleeful cruelty, taken up the cause of a man they had never met, and had turned his family's life into a living hell, for no other reason than their own bored and deeply pathetic amusement. He is left with a quiet, chilling knowledge that haunts the new, profound silence of his unlisted and deeply private life. He knows that in the modern world, the most dangerous data breach is not the one that exposes your credit card number. It is the one that exposes your family, and he is left with a final and deeply unsettling question. In a world where a simple, shared spreadsheet can be turned into a weapon of mass, familial destruction, where exactly are you supposed to hide? A single comment in a harmless debate, a simple proof of delivery photograph, a name on a corporate spreadsheet. These 3 stories began with the most mundane, insignificant pieces of our digital lives. They all ended in the same terrifying and irreversible place, the complete and utter destruction of privacy. The true horror of doxing is not the initial act of exposure. It is the silence that follows. It is the moment you realize that the thin, fragile wall between your online life and your physical one has been shattered, and that your home, your sanctuary, has been turned into a public target on a map for a faceless and often merciless. However, the terror is not that the crowd will show up at your door. It is the quiet, constant, and soul-crushing knowledge that they could. These accounts force us to confront a chilling truth about the world we have built. The most dangerous weapon is no longer a physical object, but a piece of information. The most effective prison is not one with bars, but one built of paranoia, where every ring of the doorbell, every unknown number, is a potential threat, and they leave us with a final, deeply unsettling question. In a world where your entire life is just a few clicks away from being public knowledge, how much of a stranger are you really from being the next target? If these stories have made you think twice about the information you share, prove that your privacy is still yours by subscribing to Whispered Fear, leaving a like, and sharing this video. Your support helps us to expose the monsters that hide behind the screen. But what if the weapon used against you isn't your address, but your most intimate, private moments? What if the threat isn't a mob of strangers, but a single person who knows your deepest secret and is using it to destroy you? Click the video on your screen now as we explore a new level of digital blackmail. 3 true scary stories of sextortion in everyday chats. See you there. And be careful what you share.